On this episode of Locked On Lightning, Cooper's in some hot trouble. We talk about some closing thoughts on the early exit, and we give our playoff favorites. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. On today's episode of Locked On Lightning, we're giving our closing thoughts on the early playoff exit for the Tampa Bay Lightning. We talk about Cooper's post-game comments he made yesterday, whereas that has landed him in some hot water with some people. We also talk about our playoff favorites. So before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Hit that notification button. So as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. And just so everybody's aware, even though the Lightning are not anymore in the playoffs, we'll still be coming to you 5 days a week going forward. And then I believe once the NHL playoffs conclude, we'll be doing 3 episodes per week. Stay tuned because I'm not entirely sure about that, but when that would actually start. So we're talking about closing thoughts on the early exit, and there's a lot of going back and forth, whether it is on Twitter or YouTube, on our YouTube channel, last night's video. There's been a lot of going back and forth, okay? And this kind of goes hand in hand with the comments that we will discuss in just a little bit with Jon Cooper. But I'm not making excuses. I know there's Panthers fans that listen to the episode and may not have necessarily have listened as intently as maybe our Lightning listeners would have. But I'm just want to dispel some kind of comments or maybe some notions that are going on. The Lightning didn't lose this series because of the refs. I really haven't made a comment throughout the course of this series, really up until last night, about the officiating. I am a firm believer that regardless of how the refs are calling a particular game, regardless if it's in favor, whether or not that is intended, of one team or the other, I still feel like the game is going to be won by the better team. The series is still going to be won by the better team, unless it's absolutely horrendous refereeing in which, the other team is constantly getting calls on calls on calls and calls, and nothing is getting in return for the opposing team. I didn't feel like that was the case in this series. I really didn't. I felt like for the most part, other than really the goals that were taken away in the other game last night, in which, really looking back on it, I mean, the goaltending interference that was first called back on Duclair, that was my thing with that is that, yeah, he's definitely going into the crease without being forced there. That's undisputed, 100%. But basically, I don't feel like the contact he made with Bobrovsky was that obstructive to where it prevented him from really, we've seen this before during the regular season, during the playoffs. I know obviously in the playoffs it means a whole lot more, and as we saw last night, it had a huge, really effect on the Lightning. Both those goals being taken back, but I didn't feel like that was ultimately the reason why this team lost. They lost the series because they didn't execute, and the same goes for last night. They didn't execute. They didn't take care of the puck. It seemed as though, except for Game 4, really the Lightning were just atrocious with the puck possession, especially in the neutral zone and zone entries. I spoke about it with Armando Velez through text, host of Locked On Panthers, earlier today, how really, the Panthers were able to kind of really do whatever they wanted on the defensive side of things. They were able to stand up the Lightning going into zone entries. They were really not allowing them to get enough space. Kucherov, for as frustrating as his performance was, at the same time, you got to tip your cap to the Panthers because they did a phenomenal job of clamping down. And the Panthers, the Lightning should have really not have been that surprised by that. Obviously, the guy has over 140 points during the regular season. He's going to get a lot of attention coming into the series, 100%. And they should have game planned for that. And whether or not they did and they just didn't execute is just a whole nother thing that, maybe we could unpack as the weeks go on. But I didn't feel like the penalties or the penalties that were called, other than those two goals that were taken back, like, yes, 100%. Maybe let's say one of those two goals stays, right? Obviously that doesn't guarantee the Lightning win the game. Maybe it doesn't get as out of hand as 6-1, but maybe we're sitting here talking about 4-2 or 5-2, something of that sorts. But I don't want there to be any kind of misconception about what happened, whether it be this week, next week, over the summer, going into next season. No, the Lightning were not well equipped to win this series. Outside of Stamkos and Hagel and Point and Vasilevsky, really nobody else showed up to play on a consistent basis in this series. And the Panthers are just a better team. It kind of frustrates me when I see Lightning fans saying, instead of just trying to, tip their cap to the Panthers, and maybe that's the reason why, because it is the Panthers, just because, they beat us and they were better, that's not a bad thing. I said that last night. It's not a bad thing that this happened for the Lightning, because they're at that sweet spot where they could still win championships as long as they do things the right way this offseason and the next offseason. As long as they bring back Stamkos, Kucherov plays well, Vasilevsky continues to play well, and the Lightning continue to tool up and get ready for more playoff pushes. It's not a bad thing, and it's definitely not a bad thing to tip your cap to the Panthers. Yeah, they're your in-state rivals. They're at the height of their success right now. This is the best 2-year stretch they've probably ever had in their franchise history. But I don't think Lightning fans should be petty about this, because you still have 2 cups, 3 straight Stanley Cup final appearances. It's one of those things where this isn't the beginning of the end. This is just taking a step back for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And other teams are allowed to have success other than the Tampa Bay Lightning. I know some people are going to go nuts off of that, but it's 100% true. And I think that, if you were a firm believer, if you were, and I kind of wasn't, but if you were a firm believer that this team wasn't hungry going into the playoffs, well, maybe this is the kind of thing that kind of reignites the hunger for the team. So I would look at it that way if I was in that kind of that grouping of people that felt that way. So let me know in the comments. I mean, we could probably continue to talk about this for the rest of the week, and I'm sure we will, and we'll reference it at certain points. I said it last night. There is really a lot to unpack from this series, but really to break it down simply, I mean, there was really no outside forces that held back the Lightning other than their own, I guess we could say, negligence. Because really that's what it is when you constantly give over the puck, when you constantly go into the games and make the same mistakes, when you constantly allow the opposing team, who is very good, and really when you go into those matchups, there's no margin for error. There's really, you left them off the hook really quickly in those first couple of minutes of each game. That's negligence right there for me. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, if you have questions, comments, topics you want me to talk about, other things that you want me to dive into, now is the time. I mean, if you guys wanted your input on this podcast, the offseason is the place to do it. So definitely reach out to us, whether it be in the comment section below the most recent video or on our social media pages, LO_Lightning on Twitter, LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. If you want to give me a shout out, ask me up front, whether you want me to address it on the podcast or on the side, let me know. At DankyDank, DNKYD8NK. Love hearing all from you on X. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about some interesting comments that were made that I think were, whether you listened to the whole thing or you saw little snippets of it, I feel like they were taken the wrong way. I feel like they were just blown out of proportion. And I saw kind of the start of it last night afterwards, and we'll talk about more of it coming up. But Jon Cooper is in trouble with some people that don't like what he was said last night. What did he say? We'll talk about it in just a little bit coming up. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Monopoly Go. Now, listen, we got to pause here to talk to you about Monopoly Go because I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's so much more good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you could team up with friends for timed events where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much more to get. Unique stickers, cool new playing pieces, travel the boards with hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. So go ahead to Monopoly Go play right now. Right, play as you listen to the podcast. Go ahead. I wouldn't blame you. Go ahead and download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So, as always, I'm going to thank you all for making us your first listener of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. We are available on Amazon Music, iTunes, Spotify. We're on YouTube, like I said. But I want to take a moment just to thank you all because the enthusiasm has been phenomenal over really this entire season, especially the last couple of weeks. And I hope you continue to listen to us every day throughout the course of the offseason as we continue. Just because the Lightning are not in the playoffs anymore doesn't mean we're going to stop talking about the playoffs. We're still going to be on here because at the end of this episode, we're going to be talking about our playoff favorites. We talked about bandwagons. I kind of talked about it on Twitter last night. So go ahead, throw in the comments. Let me know your playoff favorites or the bandwagon that you're currently jumping on. But right now we got to talk about some serious stuff that we really don't talk about a whole lot. The Lightning, for the most part, throughout the course of this podcast that we've had since 2020, have really not had drama around them. And I don't really look at this as drama either, but because I firmly believe this is going to be something that is going to be forgotten about. I just feel like people, because it's Jon Cooper, because it's Tampa Bay Lightning, people are pouncing on it. People are going to make the most of it. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the comments he made last night post-game where he was asked about the two calls that were goalie interference. And I'm going to quote from an article, what I saw on Sportsnet, and this is pretty much what he said word for word in the video. If you want to go on Twitter or online and look at it, Chris Kren, Lightning reporter, friend of the show, he tweeted out the full video as well as some of the transcript. So he was when he was asked about the two calls, he said, "So that was clearly a turning point in the game. If anybody's going to talk about this game, they're going to talk about the goals that were taken away. In this game where goals are at a premium, all we've done is make the rules for more goal scoring. That's what we've done every year. There seems to be something we tweak so more goals can be scored. And that's great, but there's mandates." And the words were, to pull a goal off the board, it has to be unbelievably egregious. That's the standard to pull a goal off the board. And then he goes on to talk about the Forsling no call on the pull, on the holding on Duclair. And then he made a comment at one point where, I'm trying to find it real quick because it's the where. He basically made a comment where he said that he basically went on to say, it's not in this article, but he basically meant to say that to a certain extent the rules baby the goaltenders. They protect the goaltenders way more than they really should. And if they want, to soften up these guys or protect these guys so much, then you might as well just put a skirt on them. And a lot of people have been going on Twitter. They've been going on various hockey blog sites. There was a ridiculous article on some Maple Leaf fan blog site that I very quickly glanced at and was just like ridiculous. But a lot of people are calling him misogynistic and all that. And I think, like I said, I think this is just everybody who is not a fan of the Lightning, who is not a fan of Jon Cooper by extension. This is just their first and only chance to really jump on him and really kind of go crazy about it. And like I said, it's one of those things where you need to understand, it's post-game. There's a lot of emotions going on. There's obvious frustration if you watch the video. Obviously, in today's age, with all the social issues that are going on, everyone's always going to get offended about something. That's just the way it is. And for anyone that's ever played a sport, you've heard all the cliches, don't throw like a girl or whatever the case may be. And that's the same thing, that's kind of like in the same realm, putting, what his comment was made. I don't think it's anything that crazy to where the Maple Leaf blog site actually suggested that he should face serious consequences. Now, I stopped reading, and I think that was like the title, so that shows you how in depth I really looked at it, and it was just really, it's really stupid. It's really stupid, and I think that a lot of people are kind of blowing it out of proportion. So I'm pulling up another one right now. So he said, we might as well put skirts on them then. I think we're letting the goalies off the hook. Jon Cooper weighs in on I that's really what it is. I mean, I don't think that's a derogatory thing. He was talking about goaltenders in general. And that's just the saying, for being soft. That's just what it is. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of people are just looking for a reason to be upset. And that's what it is. And I don't think that there was anything wrong with what he said. Now, could he probably, in hindsight, could have said things a lot different and still kind of conveyed his point? Yeah, if he just takes that skirt comment out and kind of just says, I think we're letting the goalies off the hook, no one would have ever had an issue with it, I think. And that's true. I think that it's kind of like in the NFL, there's a ton of rules that basically, if you even look at if you look at the quarterback the wrong way, you get a penalty, and that's kind of where we're at now with the NHL. And I'm the same way. I'm 32 years old. I grew up watching hockey in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. It was probably the roughest hockey we've seen, other than probably the 50s, the 40s, the 60s hockey, the 70s hockey. I that's just the way it is. Where there needs to kind of be some give and take, because there's plenty of opportunity. I mean, there's plenty of events where we see goaltenders kind of, even if they're in the crease, they're kind of interfering with players in front of them. And then, these guys, or even when they skate behind the net, or they skate to get a puck. I mean, there's certain rules that you can't make contact with a goaltender. And I think to a certain extent, that's a little ridiculous, because once you leave the net, you are now a skater. You are not a goaltender. And, that's a rule I firmly believe that they should kind of tweak to kind of allow defenders, obviously you shouldn't be blowing up the other team's goaltender. That's just a little crazy, but I'm sure you kind of get where I'm going with this. But going back to Cooper's point, I think that, especially the Sergachev goal, that was a little ridiculous. I mean, where I forgot who the Lightning player was on that play. I for the life of me can't remember, but I just think that in that instance, it looks like Sorelli. No, it's Chafee. Realistically, where is Chafee supposed to go? Actually, that is Sorelli. So where is he supposed to go in that situation? He's sandwiched between Bobrovsky and I don't know who. I think that's Mikkola. Where is he supposed to go? Is he supposed to just stand there? And if you look closely, if he stands there, okay? If he stands there in front of the crease, if you look at the still, and it's on Sportsnet, if you want to look at it, don't play the video. Just look at the beginning JPEG to this video. If you look at it, Bobrovsky is like almost on the right, if not more. I know his skates are in the blue of the crease, but his body is hanging over the crease. In my opinion, that should allow you as an opposing player to not get penalized if you're making contact with him. And I know a lot more was done with that. He tried to spin out of that, obviously, and get out of that sandwich, but that there's a little bit of, there should be some sort of kind of guideline for that. And that kind of also goes hand in hand with, what we always see, even if it's not a penalty, opposing players pushing the guy that they're defending into their own goaltender, and the guy gets a penalty for interference or whatever sometimes. Very rarely, but still. There needs to be some sort of, I think, we need to have some sort of kind of gloves off approach for this with goaltenders, because it's getting a little out of hand to where eventually, with all the rules that they're making. Now, I'm not saying let's go back to the rules back in the day and you could just go crazy. No, absolutely not. But I think that in this still, I mean, that if you're Jon Cooper and you see that, you have every right to be upset. Like I said, what in reality is Sorelli supposed to do there? How is he supposed to gain back positioning in that scenario? If an opposing player is basically backing him down into the opposing goaltender. So let me know in the comments. I mean, there was a lot of Panthers fans, obviously. I didn't even have to look at the pictures of some of you in the comment section last night of last night's video when I briefly spoke about the penalties. But it's true. I mean, it's not that I don't understand the rules. It's the fact that sometimes these rules defy rationale. And there needs to be some sort of I don't think it's so much the rule itself. I think the language needs to be changed just a little bit in order for there to be some sort of actual realistic ruling on it. And because that's why with some of these rules, they don't get called consistently. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, I look back at it now, and even before I mentioned it, if not, I did. You know, those 2 goals getting called back, it doesn't necessarily win the game for the Lightning if they're both good goals or overturned, whatever the terminology we would like to use. You know, you still, but like I said, the first goal that was overturned, it definitely shifted the ice dramatically. You know, if it doesn't get overturned, you know, we go from a 6-1 game to maybe a 4-2 game. At the end of the day, it kind of shifts the momentum, but it doesn't necessarily stop the outcome. So, yeah, let me know in the comments below. I'm sure there'll be more talk about this whole Cooper thing, as, you know, other opposing fans will try to find something to be mad about, as they always do. If I was an opposing fan and another coach said this, I wouldn't be upset. So I don't think a lot of people should either. So let me know in the comments below. And coming up, we're going to talk about our playoff favorites. You know, the Lightning are not in the playoffs anymore, but we could still watch the playoffs. You know, we're not outlawed from watching the playoffs. And we're going to talk about our favorite teams that are still in it. But coming up, we're going to talk about our last sponsor of today's show, and that's our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in the app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So, once again, one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen. And thank you to the everydayers who have joined us every single day here on Locked On Lightning. And I hope you continue to join us going forward, as well as the new fans that have just joining us for the first time. As we continue to pump out content, you know, like I said, we're doing 5 days a week, and then eventually we'll go to 3 over the summer, and then we'll go back to 5 once training camp comes back. And, you know, that's going to be fun. You know, we got the draft, we got free agency, plenty to talk about. We're going to be putting out a series during the summer where, since it's the 20-year anniversary of the Lightning winning in 2004, we're going to go through every playoff series, every game, as long as it's on, you know, we found the first round series. So definitely check that out with us when, you know, you can find it on YouTube. So we're going to be recapping it and talking about it just like we would any other Lightning game. So looking forward to that. So we're looking at the playoffs, the remaining teams that are in it. So we got the Panthers, obviously, that are in the second round, and the New York Rangers. Carolina just clinched their series tonight. We're still waiting on Boston and Toronto to kind of see where the chips may fall for the East. Out in the West, we got Dallas and Vegas are tied in their series. Colorado's looking to close it out tonight against Winnipeg. We got Vancouver and Nashville. Nashville's hanging on for life right now. And then Edmonton and LA. Edmonton's in control of that series 3-1 over the Kings. And so right now the scores as they are, second period, 3.5 left. Colorado's up 3-2. Nashville and Vancouver are scoreless. Toronto won tonight in overtime to keep themselves alive. And like I said, Carolina won their game to clinch their series 6-3. And then we got Vegas and Dallas tomorrow. That's a good series. If you haven't been watching the playoffs other than the Lightning, if you want to watch a series that's pretty exciting so far, it's been Vegas and Dallas. I caught tail end of that after we did our podcast last night, post game. So looking at the playoffs, I would say that, you know, obviously the Lightning being out of it, it's kind of hard to root for a team out of the East. I think we could agree. So looking at the West, I mean, out of the East, real quick, I will say probably the most exciting story we could get out of the East is probably going to be Carolina. They're a team that I think has been pretty good for the last 5 years, a team that is kind of has been kind of on the cusp of like being that championship contender. But every year there's always been something. Whether it's been goaltending or really, in my opinion, they don't have like a star. They have like Svechnikov, and then they have like kind of a smattering of like very good players like Martin Necas. But other than that, they don't have like what we see from, like a Boston or from a Florida. They got like Reinhart, they got Barkov, they got Verhaeghe. Boston's got Pasternak and Marchand, Coyle. Toronto obviously has Austin Matthews and Nylander and Marner. The Rangers are kind of like that team, like what Carolina is. They kind of have like a smattering of guys that are going to be able to help you on a nightly basis. Sturkin's kind of been shaky this year, but I haven't seen enough out of him. I've caught a little bit of the series against Washington, to where I didn't see him really get to that level. I saw him have like big opportunities and big saves, but I never really saw him really take control. I think it was the other way around. And also Washington's really not that good, as you saw. They pretty much weren't able to do anything in that series. On the other side of that, on the West Coast, like I already stated, Dallas-Vegas, that's a phenomenal series. They're both tied. That series is tied right now. Vegas looks really good. Dallas looks really good. You got a great story going on in that series. You got the defending champion versus a team who really is another team, kind of like what we've seen with the Rangers, what we kind of seen with Carolina. Lightning fans should remember that Cup series against Dallas not too long ago in the bubble. That was the same thing. They kind of have like a smattering of guys who can contribute. The goaltending, they don't have a star. Now they have one in Jake Otter. But Dallas is kind of looking to take that next step, and I think that's pretty cool. I always, whether it be with the Lightning, of course, but I always like to see other teams that are not in traditional hockey markets succeed, and I think that's something that Lightning fans should kind of take into consideration when they're picking their bandwagon. Winnipeg, Colorado, ideally I would like to see Winnipeg win that series because Connor Hellebuyck, he's just so fun to watch. I love seeing good goaltenders advance in the playoffs, and I think Hellebuyck is a hell of a goaltender, as we know from years past with him winning Vezina trophies. Vancouver, Nashville. Vancouver has been able to take control of the series, even though I think that Thatcher Demko is still out. I know he was hurt early on. I'm not entirely sure if he came back, but Nashville, like I said, is trying to extend this series. And then we got Edmonton and L.A. L.A., I think, is pretty much toast at this point, 3-1. Edmonton, I will say, to make a case for making them your bandwagon, I would say because you want to see great players play on the biggest stage of hockey. Obviously, that's the Stanley Cup final. And I think that, that'd be pretty cool to see Connor McDavid play in a Stanley Cup final. Now, if he could get past Vancouver, Colorado, or whoever wins the Vegas series, that is yet to be seen. I mean, I think really the favorite coming out of the West right now is probably, if we're not looking at Vegas, Dallas, I would say the big dog out of those teams is probably Vancouver. And that's really all dependent on whether or not Thatcher Demko is 100% to go. But it's going to be interesting. I really think that the East is super tough. I was talking about this with Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers. I firmly believe that, the champion is going to come out of the East. I think it's going to be, if I have to pick, out of Florida, New York, and Carolina. I think those are probably the top three favorites to win the Cup coming out of the East. I think the West, as cliche as this sounds, I think it's going to be a dogfight, and I think that whoever comes out of the West is really going to be limping into the final. And I don't think that's going to make for a short series, but I don't think that team's going to be able to measure up to playing against, these grizzled Eastern Conference teams. But having said that, my pick here on Locked On Lightning for our bandwagon to jump on is the Dallas Stars. And that's not just because I saw some Lightning fans on Twitter last night saying that we got to root against Vegas because they copied the Lightning's mold about how they do, which I didn't really understand that. I want someone to explain to me. I guess maybe they're just picking someone up at the deadline every year, and that's the way they're doing it, how they're copying how the Lightning used to do it and win cups. But I'm picking Dallas because, like I said, I like teams from non-traditional hockey markets winning championships, whether it be the Lightning or other teams. And obviously, since the Lightning are not in it, I would love to see Dallas win. They have a very good group of players, some old, some very young. Wyatt Johnson, 20 years old. The kid is a phenomenal player. Scored the overtime winner last night to even up the series for Dallas. So they're my pick. Let me know in the comments below who your pick is, who your bandwagon is for the rest of the playoffs, and why. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk more about some hockey news. I'm sure there's still going to be some kind of backfire or backlash from the Cooper comments. There's going to be some stories, I'm sure, coming out this week about players playing with injuries, this, that, and the other thing, as we always are accustomed to after the playoffs, and at least for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.